I could ask you a very simple question, and I go, are you aware that there are other kinds of more effective and more efficient ways of producing energy than fossil fuels? And almost everybody will say, yeah. And I say, so where are they? And the answer is, well, it's not in the interest of the fossil fuel industry to sell these things. Okay? Now, when it comes to biology, there's the drug company. They sell chemicals. They sell drugs. And if you come up with energy healing or, fields and invisible forces, that's completely to them is like the free energy devices for the petroleum people. They will actually stop the research in that area, take away the money, or send the skeptics to your house. Like I'm sure you must have, on Halloween, skeptics show up a lot.
Well, I've never had house visits from skeptics, but I do get a lot of abusive emails. There's an interesting debate in Britain at the moment because we have a socialized medicine system which is paid for from taxes. And of course it's getting more and more expensive. And it's very difficult for governments all over Europe where there's pretty good social welfare provisions on the whole. Do they raise taxes, very unpopular, to pay for ever more expensive medicine? Or do they somehow try and deliver it cheaper? And they're now very obsessed with what they call evidence-based medicine. What this means is that in its better forms, they do peer-reviewed study, meta-analyses, and they find that if a generic drug will have the same effect as an expensive patented one, they now put pressure on doctors to dispense the generic drug, often made in India. It's really cutting the costs. So it's not in their interest, actually, to support pharmaceutical companies to a very large degree. In Britain, we also have a certain amount of alternative medicine within the National Health Service. And on the whole, it could be a lot more, and there's certainly the potential for a lot more. It's held back by the evidence-based medicine. I'm now running a campaign in Britain to try and persuade the government to take up evidence-based medicine properly and do outcome studies. That, I think, is the fairest way. I call it level playing field trials. Take a condition like lower back pain that lots of people have, or cold sores, or something like that, or migraine headaches. And then you could have, say, 1,000 people who suffer from it, allocate them at random to different treatment modalities. Anyone who claims to be able to cure it could try. Homeopaths, acupuncturists, chiropractors, craniosacral osteopaths, and naturopaths, anyone who claims to be able to, acupuncturists, anyone who claims to be able to, physiotherapists, they could all have a go. And you just see general practitioners, just how they all turn out in comparison to the cost and the treatment, just simply the outcomes. Do people get equally better from all these? They might. Do people get better with some than others? Do the practitioners make a big difference? Rather, are they more important than the system? These kinds of outcome studies could, I think, actually tell us what we need to know, what works. Completely theory-free, completely pragmatic. And say it turned out that homeopathy worked best. Then, of course, the critics would say, well, that just proves they're getting a huge placebo effect. So, well, okay, if it's a big placebo effect, if they're getting a bigger placebo than anyone else, then that's the best treatment. And so I went to a very interesting conference in London a few months ago on the placebo effect. And there were people from mainstream medical institutes who are now recognizing, yes, it's not just a nuisance in clinical trials, it's real, it's important, and it does something. There were other people from alternative medical research, there were skeptics and so on. But what became clear was that everyone agreed that the placebo effect, the body's own healing capacities, are important, and they're at work in all forms of medicine, including conventional medicine. The final panel discussion was the most interesting bit. It was entitled, "Can there be an honest placebo?" Because a placebo, if it's a blank pill, doesn't work if you know it's a blank pill. You have to think it's some wonder drug for it to work. So can there be an honest placebo? I thought it was a really good question.
Well, and there's a dishonest placebo out there right now that people buy by $1 billion a year called Prozac. Prozac, in a chemical test in a laboratory situation by the drug companies, revealed to be no better than a sugar pill in its effectiveness. And yet they just hid all that data, and it was hard to get it out that Erwin Kirsch, a psychologist at University of Connecticut, had to go through the Freedom of Information Act to get this data from the drug company to reveal that, in fact, it is no better than it's a good placebo, though.
Yes.
It's a good one. And you know why? Because, as you say, if you take a sugar pill and you don't feel anything, then it's just your belief that's, I think it's going to work. But the Prozac works really good because it has a side effect. It actually makes you tingly or something. I don't know, something like that. But the point about it, as soon as they take it, they say, oh, it's working. And as soon as they feel it, it enhances the placebo effect even farther.
Yes.
And the statistics are very clear. 1/3 minimum, 1/3 of all medical healing is directly attributable to the placebo effect. And that includes surgery as well as drug-related healing.
Yes.
So, as Rupert was mentioning, it's very important is that the drug companies are doing their level best now to identify people who react to placebos, to eliminate them from their drug so they can find a test to identify them and then take them away from the drug test, because the placebo people ruin the drug trials, because most of the drugs are no better than the placebo effect.
Yes. Well, Erwin Kirsch was actually at this conference I was talking
he was
about.
there.
He's now moved to England, and he's at the University of Plymouth. He gave a brilliant paper. What he showed is much as what you say. In the published trials, the Prozac, 80%, the placebo was 80% as effective as the Prozac. In the unpublished trials that he got through Freedom of Information Act, it was 100%
Oh,
as effective.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
He managed to get the drug companies to reveal them by using the Freedom of Information Act. The whole interest in the placebo effect is actually a way in, because everybody agrees it happens. Conventional doctors have been saying it for years. It's obvious it involves the mind. And now I think there are some quite interesting theories. I don't know if you've come across Nicholas Humphreys' theory of the evolution of the placebo effect.
No, I haven't, actually.
He's a friend of mine, a psychologist in Britain. And he's an evolutionary psychologist. So he's in other respects a skeptic, a materialist, got all the right credentials for getting on well in the scientific world. But his theory of the placebo I find very interesting. He argues that the interesting question is not why does the placebo effect happen, but why doesn't it happen most of the time. And his theory, simple and plausible though, is that not just in humans but in animals, if when you get an infection or a disease or something, if the animal throws the whole of its immune response and the whole of its healing capacities at this disease, what if another one comes along? Because you see, it takes time, it takes energy and commitment of the immune system to respond in this way. But then if another disease comes along, another emergency, another injury, you've got no reserves. So he thinks what's happened is that not just us, but animals in general, have a system where the healing response is ramped down to a lower level so that it's not working at full capacity because something has to be kept in reserve for other problems that might arise. But as soon as an animal or a person knows that they're safe, they're being taken care of, that they're being protected, then there's no need for this extra, keeping this capacity in reserve, and it's disinhibited. That's the placebo effect, according to him.
It's interesting because stress hormones have been identified as the chemistry that shuts off the immune system. And as you said, it's a way of conserving energy for what's needed. So, for example, if you have a bacterial infection and you have a bad case of diarrhea, and a lion is chasing you, then you have to decide how much energy you're going to put into fighting the bacteria and how much energy to put in running away from the lion. And it turns out, I appreciate it because you don't fight the bacteria, because if you get eaten by the lion, then diarrhea is his problem at that point. But the reality has been really, so basically this is a mechanism of the system to protect you against the greatest threat. And that stress hormones are actually used by the medical profession when people get a graft of a transplanted organ or tissue. They give them the stress hormones. That shuts off the immune system and protects the rejection. Yeah, well, that's cool. That's an experimental situation. But what about all of us on our day-to-day lives? And this is what the big issue is by stressing yourself, I can tell you right now, if you start putting up the stress hormones in your system, then you are automatically beginning to shut off the immune system, because that's the trade-off. Are you afraid of the interior threat or the exterior threat? Which is greater? And the relevance about that is we have gotten sicker since 9/11 as an entire population because of the overall stress, and this is just wiping us out financially as a nation, downward. And the pharmaceutical companies have made over in excess of 20% per year more profit than every preceding year, just because we've gotten weaker on this thing. And I would like to suggest something, Noah. This is an interesting possibility. That we are given a lot of instinctual abilities when we arrive here, and I would include self-healing as an instinctual ability that we got. But let me tell you about another instinctual ability, and then I'll come back to the reason why. All humans can swim the moment they're born. They can come out of the birth canal underwater. All humans can swim. It's guaranteed. Then I ask a question. Well, if that's true, then how come we have to put so much effort in teaching Johnny how to swim when he's 5 years old? And the answer, then you go back and say, well, think about it this way. As Johnny was an infant, every time he got near the water, the parents threw a big fit. You know, oh my God, Johnny's by the pool, Johnny's by the creek, Johnny's in the bathtub, wherever Johnny. But Johnny's got it figured out, because in his learning state, he's now got it figured out. And he says, this thing, which I now recognize as water, is very dangerous. Why? Because every time I get near it, these people go crazy. And so the issue about it is, so now that Johnny believes in his heart, deep down in his knowing of experience, that water, it means death. And then you put a bathing suit on him, and you want to throw him in the water. And I know he's scrabbing like a cat with claws, you know. He's not going to let go. Why? Because you've conditioned him for 5 years that water is going to kill him, and now you want to throw him in the water, okay? He can't swim after that. He lost it because of the fear.